You know the sound, that little chime on your phone, the one that tells you another payment just cleared. You didn't lift a finger, you didn't decide anything. The money simply left. Electricity, water, the trash hauler, the pest company that sprays your baseboards every quarter, whether the ants came that season or not. And by the time you finished your first cup of coffee, 4, maybe 5 small withdrawals have already happened, quiet as breathing. And somewhere along the way, you stopped reading the amounts. And that is the part that ought to bother you. Not the money, the fact that you stopped looking. So I want to show you a different way of keeping track. It's a small brown book, water-stained at one corner, and it belonged to a man named Amish Stoltzfus, who farmed a little under 90 acres out in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. This book is his household ledger for the year 1924. Every dollar in, every dollar out, written in pencil, in a slow, careful hand. Now, I've read a good many of these over the years, but this one I keep coming back to, because when you add up everything Amish and his family spent across that entire year, 12 months, a household of 9, there are 6 things written nowhere on it. 6 things you and I pay for every single month. And next to all 6, Amish wrote nothing. Not a small number, nothing. The line simply isn't there. So let me tell you how the book came to me. And then, let me walk you down those 6 missing lines. Because the second part, I promise you, is going to change the way you look at your own kitchen. I found it the way you find most of these, at the bottom of a wooden box, at an estate sale outside Intercourse, sold off by a family that no longer farmed and didn't know what they had. $2. I almost didn't even open it. And here's the thing I need you to understand before we go any further. I didn't start out as the kind of man who reads dead farmers' account books. No, I started out the way you probably did. A few years back, I sat down and did the arithmetic on my own house. Just the small bills, the ones on autopay, electricity, water, trash, cleaning supplies, garden chemicals, the pest contract. Just those 6. A little over $310 a month, every month, forever, with no end and nothing owned at the finish. Around $3,700 a year, just to keep a house running the way I'd been told a house runs. And I had never, not once, questioned it. Then I opened Amish's book, and across from each of those same 6 things, there was empty paper. The first missing line is the one most people just cannot believe: refrigeration. There's no power bill in that ledger because there was no power. But more than that, there's no money spent on keeping food cold at all. No ice deliveries, no icebox, nothing. What there was instead, set into the slope just below the house, was a spring house, a small stone building with the cold groundwater of a spring running right through a trough in the floor. Water that comes up out of the earth at around 52 degrees, all year, summer and winter alike. The milk crocks, the butter, the eggs, they all sat down in that running water, and the moving cold pulled the heat right out of them. No compressor, no moving part to break, no monthly anything. And the physics is the very same physics your refrigerator uses. Heat moves from the warmer thing to the cooler thing. Except Amish let the ground do all the work, for free, the way the ground had been doing it for 10,000 years before anybody ever thought to charge you for it. The second missing line is the water itself. Amish paid no water bill, because that same spring fed the house, and a hand pump brought it right up. But the part that interests me is what he did to keep it clean. And we are going to come back to that at the very end, because it's the one thing the plain communities do not hand over to an outsider easily. The third missing line is trash. There's no hauler in that book, and there's no hauler because almost nothing ever left that farm. The vegetable peelings went to the hogs, the hog leavings and the manure went out to the field, and the wood ash from the stove. Now hold on to that, because we are about to need it 3 more times. That ash went to the soap, to the soil, and to the cellar. A broken tool got reforged. A worn-out shirt became a quilt square. You see, when you build a place where every leaving feeds the next use, you don't generate a stream of garbage that somebody has to drive away for a fee. You generate inputs. Think about that. The trash bill isn't really a trash bill at all. It's the receipt for a system that's throwing its own value straight out the back door. The fourth missing line is soap, and every cleaning product underneath it. Amish's family made their own, and they made it from 2 things they already had, for nothing. Hardwood ashes from the stove, soaked in water, leach out lye, potassium hydroxide, a real and powerful alkali. You combine that lye with rendered animal fat the butcher would have handed over for free, and the 2 of them react. That reaction is called saponification, and the thing it makes is soap, real soap. for the laundry, for the floors, for your hands. A whole year of it for the cost of nothing, because both halves were simply byproducts of living. There's no aisle in that ledger. There's no brand. The fifth missing line is fertilizer, and the bag of lawn and garden chemicals sitting right beside it. The manure, the compost, and that same wood ash all went onto the ground, because wood ash is potash and lime together. It sweetens sour soil, it raises the pH, and it frees up the minerals already locked in that dirt, so the plants can finally reach them. Amish wasn't buying fertility in a plastic sack. He was cycling it. The field fed the animals fed the field, and the ash closed the loop. And the sixth missing line is the exterminator. No contract, no quarterly spray. What he had instead was a sack of lime spread across the cellar floor and a fine powder scattered along the sills and the thresholds. Diatomaceous earth, the fossil remains of tiny water creatures, sharp as broken glass, at a scale your eye will never see. And it doesn't poison the insect. No, it scratches straight through the waxy coat on its shell, and the creature dries out and it dies. It doesn't wear off. It doesn't need a man in a truck. It just sits there, doing the one job, the way a thing does when nobody's yet figured out how to sell it to you twice. Now, none of this is secret knowledge, the way a treasure map is secret. It was ordinary. The United States Department of Agriculture printed plain language farmers' bulletins all through the 1920s and the 1930s on exactly these things: making soap at home from waste fats and lye, sweetening your soil with wood ashes, building a spring house. And Penn State and the other land-grant schools mailed that very same advice out to every farm family that asked. This was not hidden. It was published at government expense and sent to your great-grandparents for free. So what happened? Well, I'll tell you what did not happen. Nobody ever proved it wrong. The spring house still works. The lye soap still cleans. What happened is, somewhere after the war, the bulletins just stopped being reprinted. Most of them quietly slipped out of circulation between the early 1950s and the early 1970s, and in their place came something new: advertising. Because a detergent has a marketing budget, a bag of wood ash does not. A refrigerator company can buy a full page in every magazine in the country. A trough of cold spring water cannot. There's no quarterly earnings report for a stone spring house. There's no salesman for a sack of lime. And so, one decade at a time, the knowledge that cost nothing got crowded off the shelf by the knowledge that paid for the shelf. It wasn't a conspiracy. It was just money, flowing toward the things that make more money. The folk wisdom didn't lose an argument. It lost an advertising war it was never even told it was fighting. Now, I know some of you are sitting in a house you already own thinking, well, that's fine for a man with 90 acres and a spring, but it's got nothing to do with my situation. Stay with me, because this next part is for you, specifically. And you don't need land, you don't need a permit, and you don't need to call anybody. You don't start with the spring house. You start with the two easiest of the 6 this weekend. For the pests, a bag of food-grade diatomaceous earth runs you about $22 at the feed store, and one bag treats the sills of a whole 3-bedroom house with plenty left over. A sack of agricultural lime from the garden center is around $7, and it'll sweeten a small garden for the whole season. That's under $30 total to erase 2 of the 6 lines you've been paying every single month. And the soap? The soap costs you nothing but an afternoon, because the ashes are already in your fire and the fat is free for the asking at any butcher counter in town. But here is the part the plain folks do not hand over so easily. The difference between soap that works and a greasy gray mush that disappoints you and sends you right back to the store. It's the ash, and it cannot be just any ash. It has to be hardwood: oak, hickory, ash, maple, burned hot and burned clean. Softwood ash, your pine, your fir, carries resin, and it will not give you a strong enough lye. And that, right there, is exactly where most people who try this fail. Then, you test the strength the old way. You float a fresh egg or a whole potato in the lye water. If a piece of it about the size of a quarter rides up above the surface, the lye is right. But if that egg sinks, your lye is too weak, and weak lye makes weak soap. The very same way water that only thinks it's soap will never get your floor clean. The folks who tried this and quit, they almost always quit right there. Wrong ash, or lye too thin to even react. But you get the hardwood right, and you float that egg, and you will make soap on the very first try that your grandmother would have known by the smell alone. So that's the book. 6 lines, 6 months out of every year, 6 small withdrawals that a man closed off 100 years ago, with nothing but the things already lying around his own farm. He didn't live in the past. He lived in a way that almost nothing could reach in and take from him. Now, I'd like to hear from you, and I want something specific, not just a kind word down in the comments. Tell me which of those 6 bills is the biggest one in your house: the electric, the water, the trash, the cleaning, the garden, or the pests. And tell me the year your home was built, because the age of a house changes which of these you can bring back first. And I read every single one. And if you want to keep walking back down these ledgers with me, understand, the people doing this are not children chasing a trend. They're men and women in their 50s, their 60s, their 70s, reaching back for the things their own grandparents knew and never once thought to write down. So subscribe and stand with them. This isn't a channel you're boosting, it's a thing you're joining. And next week, I'm going back to that second missing line, the water. Because there was one thing Amish did to that spring and that well every single year, in the early part of March, with a single handful of something free that came straight out of his own stove. And it is the reason that family drank from the very same source for 40 years and never once got sick from it. One handful every March, and I'll show you exactly what it was.